Now call to the order the Committee of the Whole meeting Tuesday, September 24th, 2024 at 5 p.m. First of all, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the unceded ancestral territory of the Silks Okanagan peoples and the Splatseen of the Secwepemc Nation. Be looking for an adoption of the agenda, that the September 24th, 2024 agenda for the Committee of the Whole meeting is adopted. Moved by Councillor Todd, seconded by Councillor Nietzsche. Thank you. And adoption of the minutes, that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting, September 3rd, 2024 be adopted. May I have a mover? Councillor Wayner, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Todd, thank you. All those in favor? And that is carried also. And right on to business tonight. Ms. Lori Cordell is going to do a presentation on our OCP for us. Ms. Cordell, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just bring the presentation up. Oh, yeah. Excellent. So tonight we have a bit of an interactive session to go through the second piece of the official community plan. We went through the first set kind of at a fast clip. And here we are looking at the policy section. So I wanted to just take a quick minute to review what parts of the OCP we've done already. We've already looked at the introduction, the community context, where we're heading, and the strong growth management sections. I thought I would give you a minute in case anything has come up that you wanted to ask questions on since the last meeting. Any changes you're thinking about. I have the version that you saw doesn't have all the final edits in it. So I have been still editing away. It'll be slightly different, not dramatically different from the version that you saw. And I have, until we get permission from both our Indigenous neighbors, I've taken the information in that section right out until we get that approved. So we're just waiting on that.
Not that I have any disagreement with what's been brought forth thus far, but I just did have a question regarding the areas we've targeted for building out, as to why they were chosen, if you could run by that again. And second to that, why didn't we start sort of in the downtown core and look to build out? It seems like we're bisecting the city, if you will.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. So my expectation is we will be starting in the downtown core, but it doesn't look like it on the map because the downtown zone allows for that densification as part of that commercial zone. It's built right into the zone. So it just looks like commercial and then into single family. I think that we focused on some of the kind of the nodes where we know we have transportation space for growing our transportation corridors. There is obviously still some room to look at more density in proximity, and there are policies that support growing more density in proximity to the downtown. And particularly those special development areas that kind of appear as blanks on our map right now, those are expected to bring more density right close to the core there. And that would be our real focus for growth in those areas. They're greenfield, they're not in the agricultural land reserve. They will require substantial infrastructure investment. So to make that financially feasible, they need to be at a density that makes it viable. So I think that's why we targeted it the way we did. Okay. Excellent. And of course, the doors never close to these conversations until we take a draft to the public hearing. And even after that, we can amend it. We just have to go through a bit of a process. So. All right, so moving on, what I thought I would do as we look at the next few sections. So tonight we've got strong community, which includes all of these things. I'm not going to read them all out to you. I feel like that's going to be painful. It's going to be painful enough going through them section by section. So I thought I would put them up on the screen. We could talk about what they generally are. And then if you have any things you want changed or things we think we've missed, feel free to bring it up. But it's a lot of slides, so strong community, which focuses on these Indigenous partners, attainable housing, arts and culture and heritage, community safety, downtown activation, economic development, food security, and social well-being. Then strong environment, which is our climate action resiliency, natural environment, water and wetlands, and hazard management. Strong infrastructure is our transportation, our aligning our infrastructure with growth and being careful with our assets as we move forward. So I'm just going to dive right in. The first section under strong communities, Indigenous partnerships. So we've really looked to strengthen this part of our OCP. This wasn't really a big part of our OCP. I've put it front and center so that it's kind of the first section of this. Looking at strengthening our relationships and our partners and our role in enhancing our community's understanding of the Indigenous peoples of this area. So relationship building, bringing in maybe some elements of Indigenous culture into our public spaces and our facilities, and a stronger understanding of history and culture in Armstrong. So looking at it both from the government to government, but also growing our community.
So do you think it would benefit to get together and have food with Splat Scene and OKIB as we get into this so that we do have a reminder, a better understanding of how to build those relationships? And I say that because Chief Mike brought it up at UBCM that it's time that we made more of an effort to get together his council to council. So if that's something that we could move forward on, just to kind of ease our way in, I think we should.
So through your worship to Councillor Fowler, I have lots of ideas. Getting together and sharing food is, I think, foundational when building relationship with Indigenous communities. I think that some of the work Warren's doing right now around the emergency funding, emergency management funding for engaging is meant to get us into that space a little bit more, I think, but they haven't quite come up with a plan. But I guess what I would say is building a personal understanding of each other. It will be foundational to moving forward together as a business. So it's just a different kind of approach to relationship building.
There was some funding available for community to community. Is there still?
There's some funding available. I don't know if it's specifically community to community forums. We did review a funding opportunity that came up, but because we have so much through that emergency management bucket, we thought we should use that for relationship building now, and then in a future year, maybe apply for that additional funding.
Thank you, Your Worship. Lori, I think I brought it up before, but I believe that there is an already signed communication protocol or some sort of government-to-government agreement that the city signed with Splatcheen in the early 2000s. I remember being a part of that ceremony with Wayne Christian at the time. So maybe if we could try to dig that up. Mike Christian wasn't even aware that that was available. But it's just another, it is a policy, it's a piece of documentation that we've already, or maybe something we can build on.
Thank you for that.
Hi, through your worship. Councillor Nietzsche, after you last brought this up and mentioned it, we did do a search of our records and we were not able to locate anything.
Well, we have some more work to do then.
Thank you. I really appreciate the approach of pulling this out until we've had conversations with our partners. Not because I disagree with what's in there, but I think that as part of that relationship building and the work that I continually do with Indigenous partners through the school district is you just keep hearing nothing about us without us, right? And so I think just kind of keeping that in mind as we go through and try to incorporate stuff in.
So to clarify, actually, this part is in there still. It's in the history section where we talk about Indigenous history. So if council would like me to pause this until we are able to have a council to council conversation on this section, we can explore that as well. It just may impact our timing.
I don't know if it's necessarily to remove it, but at least provide the opportunity for feedback, right? And so to send this section over and say, hey, this is what we're hoping to include in is, like, do you have any thoughts or words for us?
Can,
Just building on what Councilor Dracula said, I think that this initiative, these are all very high level policy statements and stuff that we're seeing in the OCP. It all makes good sense. But I think I agree with Councilor Dracula that the old way of sending something out to Splatcheen or to Silks and asking for their feedback probably isn't the right way of doing it. We probably should maybe just think about how we want to get feedback on that in an appropriate way. And I think starting that relationship building is probably the right way. So I don't think we necessarily need to pause it because these are just general good statements. But I think that perhaps we could enhance this section a little bit in the future by starting that conversation with Splatcheen and Silks.
I have reached out to Splatscene to ask how they wanted to be involved in the process. And right now they're reviewing what kind of wording we would want. They've referred my request to council, so I'm waiting to hear back from their council on how they would like to be involved moving forward. And I've done the same with OKIB as well. This is again, further statements on working together and building Indigenous partnerships. So just being supportive, considering partnership, respecting history, working to advance reconciliation within ourselves and the community, and then also advancing the local government calls to action and the UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I've also put in here something about archaeological artifacts and employing a chance find policy and cultural monitors, because that is an expectation, but we didn't really have it entrenched in our policy anywhere. And this way, when I review a development application, I can say, look at this section of our OCP. You need to make sure you at least have a chance find policy in case you come across an artifact, because our whole community is a high, potential area. So. Now I turned it off. Attainable housing. So this is pretty, again, fairly broad statements, looking at increasing our diversity and our affordability, using whatever tools we can to support development of market and non-market housing. And then, of course, look at the lands that we own and how we can move forward with developing them. I don't think there's anything in here that's too controversial or unusual and out of line with what we're doing. Perhaps I'm wrong, though.
No, not at all. I just one thing that's kind of maybe I thought about highlighting is it says in the third objective, partnership with an experienced housing provider. I'm just wondering if there's a way to highlight, not make it stand out, but make it highlight a little bit local housing providers, if there's a give opportunity to local and then grow from there, if that makes sense.
Yep. Without defining what local is, in case they're from Vernon, maybe, or, yeah.
Exactly, regional, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yep. Should I keep going? Nope.
Lori, is it possible to link this to our first, the first one with the Indigenous communities and those potential partnerships that might exist between Indigenous communities and attainable housing? Because it seems to be a lot of opportunity there. Just some of the presentations and stuff we saw at UBCM, I think there were some partnerships happening in other communities with Indigenous communities.
Yeah, so I know that we worked on connecting with Vernon Native Housing, and they're definitely a strong local housing provider. So yeah, I can figure out some wording to. That's for, oh, there we go. So the last, well, not the last, but the next one has a lot of subparts. So it's looking at facilitating new non-market housing, leveraging our land. We've got enabling density bonusing in here, and I'm only looking at density bonusing on non-market housing developments because uh, the new densities we put in our zoning bylaw, quite frankly, are probably enough for us right now. I don't know if we want to encourage people to put more in, but if they want to go non-market, that's a good incentive for them. And then we already waive our DCCs. We already expedite development applications for affordable and attainable housing. And then we just continue to make sure our housing reserve fund is is appropriate. So this is just kind of a continual process of what we have now.
Step out just for 1 second, waiving the DCCs. That policy is coming forward soon, I presume.
So I think we'll be going out to tender soon, is my understanding, with hopefully completion for the spring for development cost charge development. We currently waive our community amenity contributions for these. So my thought was to bring forward a proposal that we do the same for our development cost charges.
Sorry, and just one, before we leave that one, I know that talks about leveraging city surplus lands for new development. I'm just wondering if we could consider having some language in there about the potential for city constructed buildings to include housing components as well. We saw an excellent presentation by Rossland.
Yeah, they did a really good project.
Yeah, where they built their new city hall that incorporated housing for their seasonal staffing and stuff there. And it's been a massive success, and it's actually a kind of a benchmark project that's being used around the country now. So not that we're planning to build any new buildings in the future, but you never know. Something may come up, and maybe it's something we could consider as part of it.
We can certainly have a policy that supports considering that. This would have been our best opportunity probably, but yeah. Yeah, yeah. Anything else on this one? Okay. So one thing I will find is we have a lot more policies in the new draft OCP than our old one. So if you find something that you think is redundant, we can talk about taking it out because it is a lot. Or the planner will be the one probably implementing a lot of it, but you'll see, especially when we get to development permit areas. So a lot of this though is encourage non-market housing to be centrally located so that if people don't have cars, they can walk to services. Redevelopment of lots that have non-market housing now will only be considered if they carry forward the same number of units that they have. So if, say, a developer bought one of the nonprofit housing like Sunset Housing, they would have to build at least what we have now in affordable housing if they were going to develop anything else. It's just protecting our very limited stock. Update our policies and bylaws when we update our housing needs assessment. I'm not going to recommend to council that we do a dramatic housing needs assessment update right now. What I'm recommending is that we integrate the outcomes of this tool that the province had developed into this official community plan. We leave it until the next full housing needs assessment update. The outcomes aren't so dramatically different that I think we should waste money and time on it. Yes, Councillor Fowler.
Yeah, have you seen the Regional Growth Management's latest update in our housing needs assessment that was done for the region? Because our numbers are way lower than they were in the original.
So what I was gonna do is just pull those new numbers, use those. And I have used them for our housing accelerator application, which will be before council at the next meeting, but I think I need to do a report on that. I've asked Darcy and Dan to integrate them into this OCP because they are slightly different. Are they perfect? Probably not. We could spend $30,000 or $50,000 to get a more perfect number, but I don't think we need it. We're not gonna reach our needs because they're so high. So I think we just move forward. And then engage the community on housing projects. So I know there was a lot of, there's always a lot of feelings about affordable housing projects and housing projects in general. So I think we just keep talking about why it's important and why we need to do this as we go forward. Good. Okay, so the next section, arts, culture, and heritage. So this is, I would say a section we haven't done a lot in the past, but we wanted to make sure that we showed how important it was to the community. It was one of the things that we heard. So talking about trying to become a arts and cultural leader with a thriving arts community, integrating arts, culture, and heritage into our public spaces. So we heard a lot about how we don't have a lot of public art, how we need to recognize our history. So trying to figure out how we can get that showing up more in our public spaces. And then just enhancing and promoting the role of the city isn't the biggest role because we don't have the capacity, but just supporting those who are doing this work in our community. Okay. No burning questions. Also talked about history of, this is just kind of a repeat of bringing the history of Indigenous people into the community spaces. So I know like the Chamber's working on signage that talks about history. It'd be great to have that somewhere really visible in our community. Bringing some more installations, protecting our heritage buildings. So I've woven into this because Janine and I just met with the Heritage Society and we've dissolved it. So I put in here, continue to support the heritage designated properties with the Heritage Grant and Aids and continue to share the heritage information and signage because that was another thing that they did. So I just wanted to like make sure we protected keeping those roles at the city because that was our promise to them.
Thanks. I really like number 5 where we talk about and people with diverse backgrounds because
Yes.
we do have a strong Chinese heritage background
Yes.
here as well. And it was something that we were exploring years ago when we were actually taking down the old Back Bong building. That is where the John Groneveld's big apartment building is now. But certainly that area where Huckaluck Park is undeveloped
Yep.
is something that we could consider in that area as well. So yeah, considering that was a major celery growing area and agricultural area in that particular part of the park. So yeah, so I'm just glad it's in there so that we're, we can maybe kind of highlight a little bit of our Chinese heritage here as well. It's great.
Yeah, I actually wrote Chinese history into the OCP because it hadn't previously been mentioned. So that was a new addition this round.
If we're talking, excuse me, if we're talking about protecting heritage buildings, I guess it says in the downtown area, but part of some of the heritage buildings that we have in town, we also have rezoned, I think, as higher density areas. So it might be, I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure that some of those properties have been caught up in the zoning.
So, sorry, through your worship, what we did in terms of the heritage designated properties is we only allow one additional unit. So they can only have a carriage house. They aren't able to go to the higher density and the ones that are protected by bylaw won't be able to tear down the house and replace it with a bigger one. So we did protect those, but only the designated, heritage designated properties.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
All right, this more detailed information, do you have it on something that you can send to us? I really appreciate those points because it gives us more to think about than the concise ones that we got on our agenda. Because on our agenda, we've got strong communities and then we've got Indigenous, sustainable, but we don't have all the
You
points
should have
we've got.
received the whole section. It should, here, let me,
Oh, you know what? There's two links there.
yeah,
I
okay.
only saw the one. Oh,
Okay,
my
good.
bad.
All right. Whew. Yes, and I can get you a printed copy if you'd like, Counselor Fowler.
One question here. Lori, just so I'm clear, and just kind of building on what Councilor Drapple is bringing forward. So if we, are we going to designate certain areas or neighborhoods that maybe where we have a higher frequency of heritage designated homes as being sort of a, for lack of a better word, a bit of a protected area? Because what I'm concerned about is that we would have, like, you know, 2 or 3 nice heritage homes with the style, and then, you know, then we have mega high density right beside it, or whatever else. It kind of breaks up that cluster. I know that in downtown Kelowna, they've done, in some downtown areas, they've sort of designated sort of this is the heritage conservation block that we're gonna kind of see, but are we looking at that level of protection, or?
We haven't explored that yet. I'm not sure. So once you start to designate that, it creates a lot of complications for the homeowners for renovation. So we haven't considered that, but what we have included in the development permit areas is that you need to reflect the character of the neighborhood around you a little bit so that they don't feel so anomalous. Is that the word I'm looking for? Yeah.
I think we've seen some of that. Like, I take a look at Rosedale Avenue and some of the newer homes that were built along Rosedale. I'm thinking between Danilenko and Okanagan Street. I think there's about 3 homes that were built in there. They were all done in sort of that heritage style with the nice gables and whatever else. They fit into the character of the area, but they're new homes. So that's good. So as long as there's language in there that sort of helps to protect that, it's great.
The tricky part would be is it only applies over a certain number of units, right? So that wouldn't apply to a single family home or even a duplex. Anything else in this section? Okay. Community safety. So I've gone over all this with Warren as well, just to make sure that I've captured his concerns. So just enhancing community safety, looking at crime prevention through environmental design into both our public and our private spaces so that people feel safe in our community and you're visible when you're walking, especially when we look at trails and parks and that kind of stuff. Meeting the Emergency and Disaster Management Act and all the pieces that fall in there. We already do that. It's just kind of putting it in there. And then the last one is continue managing the fire department, ensuring capacity for meeting our needs and allocation of equipment, personnel, and facility requirements. So we feel like we need to have something in here. I'm hoping council's comfortable with this.
I just was wondering about number 3, that we just change the wording of that a little bit to we'll continue to ensure that the Armstrong Fire Department, as opposed to just take out that continue managing, because we don't know yet.
Yeah. Yeah, so we wrote some of this before some of the changes and I wasn't sure how
Yeah.
council wanted to approach it. So let me that's a good
Might
suggestion.
it be an option to just mention more broadly and just talk about joint services? As opposed to being specific about the fire department or parks and recreation or cemetery or whatever else. I'm just wondering if it should just be a more broad statement, just saying that we'll continue to participate in joint services.
Yeah, I think one is they're just in different sections. I think that's
Okay.
one's
Oh,
in safety
okay.
and one's in, yeah.
We're talking about safety, yeah, because we're talking about community safety.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Would we be looking to include working with partners to increase the number of physicians, urgent care clinic, that sort of thing? Does that fall under our community safety aspect?
It might fall better under health and like the social health and well-being section, but we can certainly add that if that's something council's interested in, for sure. Yeah. And I know other communities do this.
Yeah.
Or to support the export expansion of health and medical services in our community somehow. even.
That's good. I did have the opportunity to meet with Interior Health tried to talk to them about an urgent care center. And they have policies regarding the number of residents that have to be in there. We're trying to sell them that the fact that you need 16,000 residents to get an urgent care center. But between ourselves, Spelling and Enderby, we are pretty close to 16,000 residents. So don't think it was Armstrong, think it was the community as a whole. And anyway, so I like to continue pursuing those kind of avenues.
Okay. Excellent. I'll tweak the wording a little bit based on the conversations. Yep. This is just stuff we already do, consulting with the RCMP, being an active partner in community policing, and then improving traffic safety, which has been something I think that we've all heard a lot about over the last year. So, yeah, and especially the last week. Yep. So if there are any questions, I'll just keep. Okay. And if I'm going too fast, tell me. If I'm going too slow, tell me as well. Okay, so downtown activation, there's nothing too crazy in here. Implementing the recommendations from Carrie. So the recommendations, obviously, that council endorses for appearance, safety, gathering spaces. Consider incentives for new and existing mixed-use buildings, including facade improvement programs, tax exemption program, amenity zoning, density bonusing. So I don't know how much of this we have the capacity to tackle, but it doesn't hurt to have it in here in case we come across an opportunity. Continue to support community partners activating downtown. So this is kind of the work we do with the chamber as they bring stuff to our downtown placemaking. And then looking at the downtown parking strategy and the associated cash and lieu, which is one of the carry outcomes as well. There's more. Okay, so I can't read that, but basically support densification along Wood and Patterson. So that's that kind of growing out from downtown. Maintain some restrictions on incompatible uses. So like, I don't think we want drive-throughs in our downtown core. We want to keep those out towards the highway. And we probably don't want some industrial uses, or just keeping the uses that we have right now that work for us is all that means. And then of course, looking at our special development areas, our downtown heritage, implementing the awning guidelines, and the speed zone change that we've talked about through Carrie and truck route. So shouldn't be anything too new in there. Economic development. So this is looking at what, trying to look at what is our role in economic development. This is something that we don't have a lot of capacity for in-house. But we have been talking about developing an economic development action plan that defines our role and guides our efforts as a city, what we can do. So some of the things that I see us doing is making our city look nicer, making our infrastructure work, making the roads less bumpy, making us have trail connections. That's setting the stage for businesses to come or tourism to come, getting the wayfinding signage done. Those are things that the city can do. Making sure that we keep up with our maintenance, our road maintenance and our snow clearing and our boulevard maintenance. Enhancing our gateway and our entrance, leveraging our partnerships and strengthening that with community partners, supporting tourism. So having good public spaces, water sources, and there's been a lot of talk about washrooms in the downtown. Supporting tourism with public services. Oh, that's duplicated. Note to self. Let me just take that out. And then business-friendly policy. So this is reviewing our bylaws to make sure they're working and streamlining our development processes so that it moves faster.
I wonder if we can look at the opportunity of popular topic, but there isn't any sanded dump locations anywhere other than maybe one at RV Park. And I don't even know if there's one in Vernon any longer.
There
We're
is.
trying to pull people off the highway. The ability to do that and what our future may hold for us may be something we may want to have a look at. just getting people off the highway.
Um, I can make a note of that for sure. Vernon put a new one in, and then there's two in Vernon, one at the Kin RV. I've been wondering if, does the car wash do sandy dump? Okay. So we can include that to explore options for sure.
Yeah, the one at Kin Access is a little challenging. Like, I mean, it's great for the users that are staying in the park, but to leave the highway and then try to navigate through there probably doesn't work very well, and could be a potential for us to attract more visitors having that in our community.
Anything else? Okay, trucking along. Growing local tourism, so just making sure that the zoning allows for different businesses and tourist attractions. Continue to fund and support this Chamber of Commerce as they develop and attract festivals and events. Collaborate with the IP and business community to expand the opportunities of the fair into the community. And then leverage the rail trail as an economic driver. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about any of those, the wording or.
Just curious about the wording, and I can't remember, because the chamber is actually the chamber and then also the visitor info, right? So are we as a city supporting the chamber, or are we supporting the visitor info piece of it? Where does,
So
I should know this,
we
but-
do both. We
Right.
provide some core funding for the visitor info, but we also, and events and event coordination, and we also provide a small amount of economic development funding. And then we also provide in kind the building and the services
Right.
that go with it. Yeah. So we kind of
but in terms of,
threefold.
right, in terms of our, kind of the operating grant money, most of that is the visitor center piece, right? Not necessarily the chamber,
I
even
think
though they're
it's-
the same entity, kind of.
Yeah, I think it's focused on
Tourism.
tourism and events, but
Yeah.
it doesn't specify that it's one or the other, I don't think.
I thought that one part of the scope of that original contract, or the contract, required that they operate the visitor center. I think it is written into the
It's
agreement.
part of it, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, yeah. Okay, food security. So this again is, our role in this is more of a advocating and supporting and lifting, but we already have amended our bylaws to allow chickens and bees downtown. We have lots of gardens. We have a community garden on a road right of way. We do a bunch of stuff in this already. So this is just some policy around that. Continue to encourage it on vacant and underutilized properties. So the church is a great example of this. They had underutilized parking areas, so they put the community garden on the church. Looking at public spaces for creating new community gardens, if we need to. I think this is important to have because if that road goes in where that road right away is, we're gonna have to look for a new home for the community garden. And then through our neighborhood commercial, allow some small scale grocery stores or coffee shops in our residential neighborhoods. So it's a long walk to a grocery store from some of our neighborhoods. So just allowing some small scale neighborhood commercial. I think we do need to just make sure that as we get more dense, that the backyard hens and bees still are working and serving us. And maybe we need to change the regulations a bit, but I don't think we need to tackle that one until we grow a bit. Continue to support the farmers market. And that was it for food security, so I'll go back.
Lori, do we want to have anything in the OCP that references the Agricultural Land Commission and a commitment to, you know, maybe not making application on whatever the highest rated lands are within the ALR, but having language that says that on lands that are below that level, that they could be considered? Is that something that we would want? I think we used to have it in here. And I'm just thinking about 10, 15 years down the road, if there wasn't an ALR exclusion request, we could at least put into the food security piece and whatever else, some sort of language that might appease the ALR or the ALC at the time, that would tell them that, hey, we are committed to try to preserving this land, but this land over here probably isn't the highest and best use for agriculture and perhaps could be excluded. I don't know.
I feel like we have that somewhere, but I can't, now that, I don't think it's in these sections. I think it's in our growth section. So let me go back and look at the growth policies. I think so I feel like we got some direction to not push so hard right now against them. So I think I softened the language a little bit. I also, though, took out reference to following the buffer because if we can't get any more land from the ALR, then we need to use the land we have to the maximum capacity, and that 30-meter buffer is a challenge. There's gonna be a few properties that even though they're not in the ALR, they can barely develop them. So I softened that wording as well. And I've talked to the ALC staff. They'll review the plan. We'll see what they say about it. But I think we can provide alternatives to that 30-meter buffer.
The question about the small scale farming, is that the idea there just to keep the door open for, other opportunities other than bees and chickens? Or are you thinking like the agricultural land in the community, or can you just give me a better
Yeah,
description?
I think the small scale farming was more around, we have 25% of our land is agricultural. So if we can support them to do food production, then I think that's beneficial. And then I think obviously really small scale at a household level, I think we should encourage people to be growing as much of their own food as they can. So in terms of food security, like, I don't know, I feel like going through the pandemic, we've all learned that having access to some of your own food is beneficial and makes you feel a little, I don't know, I feel a little better knowing that I'm growing some of my own food if it's not available at the grocery store. But
Yeah, I just like the opportunity that it gives if, say, we want to maybe expand the door past bees and chickens. It might allow us to
Sure,
do something
yeah.
along those lines, or just to work within that framework. So I like the way, I was just curious what the intent was, but I like how it's worded.
yeah, it keeps the door open, but it was mostly thinking about the smaller, like we have lots of smaller agricultural parcels that aren't the huge ones out in Swall, but they're still farming them. I mean, look at the Jongs, right? They're still farming that property. Yeah.
Perfect. I think that's exactly what our community uses. I think that's great. Thanks.
Good. Social well-being. So this is where maybe I would put the doctor thing. So continue to grow us as an inclusive, accessible, supportive community, to support developing and expanding social infrastructure and services. So that would be, I see some of that as being access to doctors and within our capacity, right? So, and our jurisdiction. Partnering with organizations and programs that enhance connectedness, partner with organizations that do emergency housing, and consider opportunities to use this as temporary emergency shelter. So we did that in the heat dome. We had a temporary, nobody used it, but at least we considered it and we left the door open for it. We have an age-friendly strategy that's quite old. So I'm thinking at some point in the future, maybe we look at doing this. I'm not suggesting we put this in our immediate work plan, but just have it in the OCP, and looking at a youth strategy, because we heard that the youth feel like they're not always included. So, and then partnering around transportation services. Yeah.
So on number 4, Lori,
Mhm.
one thing that comes to mind is the opportunity of ride sharing.
Mhm.
And so would that kind of be encompassed into that transportation services? Because that you're talking about community groups providing transportation services, but could there be private ride sharing opportunities that could be encouraged?
I might even
Armstrong?
suggest we just make it vaguer. I'm gonna find it here. Just consider supporting opportunities to enhance transportation.
Yeah,
or
exactly. And
something.
I'm just thinking that, ride sharing is becoming more and more popular, and we don't have a taxi service in town anymore. I think people would appreciate having some of that ride sharing opportunities for travel within the city and maybe outside the city as well.
Yep. I can bagify it a little bit, broaden it.
Just, I totally agree with you, Ryan. What I see is now we're getting all sorts of smaller rideshare companies and the bigger ones aren't. And I don't think, like, I couldn't tell you the name of the one that's operating in Vernon right now. So I'm hoping there's some work done on their end to try to make it easy and accessible for ridership.
It might be you, Ride, yeah, yeah. 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 Okay. Since this version, I think I've taken number 5 out. No, I didn't, but the zoning bylaw allows childcare in all our zones, so I'm just gonna remove that. Sharing information to increase awareness, continue to be accessible or to find ways to make us more accessible, welcoming and transparent with sharing of information, creating opportunities for different people to see themselves reflected throughout the community. Continue to work with partners on supporting vulnerable populations and adapting to the changes. And then working with regional partners on the 4 pillars approach to emergency management.
Did I read something today about the Legion and they can't put up their banners because they're not conducive, the hooks don't work or something, but are we doing something with banner art in the carry that'll allow for banners down there? Is that correct? Am I?
Can speak that it's coming up at our next council meeting. I don't know what the presentation are. The Legion did believe that some of the light standards immediately outside of their premise allows for banners, and it doesn't. It allow what our planters are hanging on, and they're totally different heights and materials used on those light standards. So they're not available for the Legion to use those because they're currently using for other things. So, but we'll have a discussion about that later next week.
Okay. Anything else on those? I might look at the adaptation strategies because I think it needs clarification, but otherwise I think it's okay. Okay, environment. I see Councillor Feller packing up. She's getting ready. Okay. So I beefed up our climate action plan section a little bit based on some of the conversations that I'd had with councils expressing an interest in developing a climate action plan. So I set the targets to mirror kind of the current standard. I added something about developing a climate action plan for us, sized for us, and looking at our risks and our vulnerability. These are all the things that go in it: community, transportation, and greenhouse gases for our emissions of our operations. We're doing a lot of this stuff now. This would just codify it, I would say. Yeah.
Sorry, question about the greenhouse gas emission measurements. Can you just help me understand, one, how we're measuring our greenhouse gas emissions as of 2017 and how we will continue to measure them as we move forward?
So they're actually measured by the province. So they provide us with a report every year and we can download that report and see, and it's based on things like fuel consumption at the gas stations. It's not 100% accurate. I don't think we have a way of being 100% accurate. And then for our operational emissions, we used to provide a report to the province every year. We haven't had to for a couple of years, but we can do that in-house by our fuel bills and our like our heating bills and our electricity. So Janine used to do that. She has a formula for calculating it. So we're able to do that.
Perfect, thanks.
So we have to differentiate between what the city is doing and what the community is doing, because those could very well be 2 different things.
That's correct. Yeah, we would differentiate between community emissions and corporate emissions because we have differing levels of control over the 2 things, right? So we can influence community emissions, but we can control corporate emissions. I have put in here developing new city buildings and facilities to be net zero. So that isn't as leading the edge as it used to be because the new step code is heading us in that direction anyways. But it will have cost implications, or council will have to waive it if we can't do it. Of course.
So with BC Hydro, they were pretty keen on trying to find public places or space or city-owned property to install EV charging stations. Have we brought that in? Is there anywhere in there?
I haven't included, yeah, encourage the development of EV charging in public and
Okay.
private spaces. We have two that'll be going in imminently at City Hall too, so. Okay. Yeah, they're down in the basement. We just have to get them put on.
And then how are we doing with other ones not on city property? Have we been able to go out and approach some of our businesses or our key business with larger parking lots for installation? Because I believe they like to see Ford chargers. That's my
Yeah, that was the
understanding.
challenge
So
with
we need
City
the
Hall.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that there's still funding available and it's a big push. I don't know how aggressive we've been about trying to find locations for that.
I haven't, any of the businesses that I've talked to had an expectation that the city would do them for them, so I'm still working that through, yeah. Okay. So strong environment, I feel like the natural environment came through as a strong theme through the community engagement. So really talking about enhancing the natural ecosystems, particularly the creeks, wetlands, ravines, and floodplain, and enhancing the integration and harmony of the natural and built environment. We weave in between the creeks and the ravines. We need to make sure that we're considering them when we have development. So I just am codifying some of these things. So at some point in the future, I'd like us to do an inventory and mapping of our environmentally sensitive areas. Right now, we just kind of, we know where they are, but it would be nice to actually have it so we can provide it to developers and they can see it. We have a soil removal and deposition bylaw that is invalid, so I put that on the radar for doing in the future. And then I've talked about encouraging landowners to protect some of the land if, through conservation tools. So I know there's been some talk about the wetlands in the downtown core. How can they be preserved into the future? And then looking at, that's a duplicate there, looking at opportunities to be a leader in environmental stewardship, integrating naturalized systems, the natural system. So we have things like rewilding of our parks and public spaces. I think putting the wetland in the pond at Okanagan is a good example of reclaiming some of those spaces. Looking at our urban forestry and keeping trees throughout our community and having greenways that enhance some of those connections. And that ties into having those pathways that walk through to and connect along those natural areas.
So do we want to have some sort of broad language about the potential for the sewer system upgrades and they're built into our OCP? Now we have language here that says we be leaders in environmental stewardship.
In the infrastructure section,
It's in the
we have a
infrastructure. Okay,
space
great.
for that.
Good.
Yeah. So then just looking at enforcing that we protect our natural systems, making sure we have land to access and maintain our environmental values, so the development doesn't butt up right against a creek. These are all pretty standard things, encouraging invasive species management, that kind of stuff. Nothing too crazy here. Yeah.
What about enhancement of park space, language about tree planting and that type of?
Yeah, that's in here. It talks about naturalized landscape design, rewilding in parks, public spaces.
Okay.
Yeah. And then this looks like a duplicate slot. No. So this is specifically around water and wetlands. So looking at protecting the creeks and the wetlands, implementing a 30-meter buffer from Megan and Deep Creek. This is part of the Riparian Act anyways. So it's not a shock to anybody, but it's just like codifying it. And then also combining it into a wetland park and trail network. So this means we have wording in our OCP. When a developer comes in, I can say, look, our OCP says, give us this area that, and they'll have to. So it just gives me tools to negotiate with. Prohibit construction in the floodway. So the floodway is the area right along the creek where the water is moving at velocity, as opposed to the floodplain where it just inundates out into the community. So we don't want people building in the floodway because they'll be in danger. The floodplain, they could build in with protection or elevation. So supporting projects that share value of our natural assets, consider using amenity contributions to encourage private sector enhancement of the natural areas.
Could we just go back to that floodway for 1 second?
Yes.
And I like what it says, but I've been seeing all around, predominantly in North America, but all around the world, that floodways are changing with storm action. And so we're setting aside one piece and saying you do something outside of that, but then we're seeing the streams actually changing course, or the rivers changing course as a result of environmental
Mm-hmm.
issues going on. So I'm a little concerned that
Let me
how
think
that
about.
works.
So what we can do, and maybe the place to do it is in the environmental DP section, is ensure that they consider the impact of climate change on whatever the course of the wetland or whatever. Okay, I'm just gonna make a note. Wetlands and creeks. Okay. Okay. Anything else?
I know when we bought an Enderby, we were told it was on the 200-year floodplain.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that with climate change coming now, those kind of things are still, those numbers are still the same. I mean, it's just the river might change because of a major event. But the language wouldn't have to change too much on this because it's going to be, you know, even with a 200-year event, it's still going to flood, is my thing.
Yeah, it's more complicated than that because it depends on what kind of impacts of climate change we're having. So if drought is our primary impact of climate change, we might not see some of those, but if extreme storms is one, like, so they layer on top of each other. And it's, what I would say is I would want them to have their engineer look at it and tell us, so that it's not on us to guess what the impact is going to be of those changes. And they can figure it out. Yeah.
Just a comment about implement the 30-meter buffer for Megan Creek. Just anytime I've put a number in there with other, when there's legislation behind it, sometimes it can bite you later. I'm just wondering something like along a minimum 30-meter or something that might give us some flexibility to extend that in case there is a change in that legislation.
Let me explore that. Oftentimes what they do is reduce it. So I'm like 30 meters is pretty big. So let me look at that. I'll just make a note. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Hazard management. So this kind of speaks to some of that. They haven't integrated all the maps yet, so that's why the map numbers are still blank. But when we get to the final version, they'll be there. But basically, we're looking at how do we discourage people developing in the flood, in lands prone to flooding. And we want to take those lands and keep them for park or open space or habitat, that kind of thing, protect it. Continue to focus on implementing the outcomes of the flood study. The bypass at Megan Creek was one of the first things we did. We can also look at developing a flood construction level. We can look at a number of different tools to help us. Make sure that they have to get a development permit when they're in a hazard area so that we know that they've had the proper studies done so that we can see. And we can ask them to consider downstream impacts as well as the impacts to their development as well. So if they're in a floodplain, are they going to push water to the neighboring property? What's that going to look like? So it gives us some leeway there. And then development on lands with 30% greater slope. This is already in our OCP. We've added encouraging them to fire smart, encouraging fire smart principles in development and subdivision design and landscape standards.
Just regarding the 30% slope, what we don't go into any detail there is the development, the size of the parcel and the development area. And I think it can be quite misconstruing that somebody thinks that they have 3 or 4 acres with a slope and they want to build a single residential home that's not on the hillside. A lot of room to read into that. And
Yeah, the way that it reads right now in our bylaws is that if there's a 30% slope anywhere on the property, they have to get a hazard development permit. So we were going to carry that wording forward in the development permit area, because if there's a slope above the house, it could slough onto the house, right? So even if where their development area is flat, as long as there's 30% anywhere on the property, it applies. They don't always like that. I've encountered it recently. And then looking at if we have any contaminated sites to remediate. I'm not aware of any right now. We don't have any abandoned gas stations or anything that we're looking at. Pardon? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Transportation, so looking at having more ways to get around than car. Yes. Go back. Yes. Corridors. Hmm. Well, we could even, there's a wild safe program that we could reference or something, yeah.
That we're going to be trying our best to mitigate impacts to wildlife and corridors.
Yeah, we do talk about wildlife corridors and habitats, but we don't specifically talk about wildlife in town, so. Okay, I made a note. Okay, infrastructure. So, looking at, wrong way, sorry. Come, there we go. So looking at having more ways to get around than by the car, being connected on walking, biking, whatever the way is. Safe and efficient system that uses complete streets approach to connect the community. So trying to make sure people can get around their neighborhoods and get to a grocery store or to their services. And then integrate transportation and land use planning. So make sure that we don't have a big apartment with no way to get there, or that the streets become too congested. We need to think about how we plan our roads as well as our houses. The nice thing about being small is everything we do is integrated, because there's only a couple of us doing the stuff. So not like a big city where we've got a road department and so this is just talking about general transportation. So having a modal hierarchy, what that means is having priority to pedestrians, bikes, having cars kind of at the end of the road, because cars have always been our focus. So we need to find a way to integrate the other pieces. Continue to maintain our road network plan. That map that they provided needs some updating for collector and local services. So we've got some updates to that. And then continue to work with Modi on highway access, being safe and efficient. I think that's up for everything for Armstrong in my mind. Should CN choose to remove the rail, we would support decommissioning the downtown rail line. And we'll continue to talk to them about issues. And of course, we want universal design in our projects so that everybody with wheelchairs and scooters and strollers can access them. And then we've been working a little bit on safe routes to school, but continuing to work on that. Okay, looking at our active transportation, implementing our active transportation plan, ensuring our roads are prioritized where there's development. So if we're gonna focus our development in certain areas, we want to make sure that we prioritize our infrastructure and our road upgrades in those areas as well. Make sure that we have key intersections where we're trying to encourage neighborhood centers to be prioritized. Explore enhancing our end of trip facilities in the zoning bylaw. I see that as kind of in the future ways. Formalizing our recreation trails by securing our tenure and integrating our the rail trail into our community networks. Mhm.
I'm just thinking, so we're talking about, and I like the idea of using, you know, active transportation, bicycles and walking. I see more people coming from Small Machine into the community. But when I think about Armstrong, I think about, you know, we have residents who are coming in from Small Machine who are driving into our schools. We have a lot of residents who don't have the opportunity to work in our community who are going to be driving to work and driving home.
Mhm.
I was wondering if you could maybe comment a bit about that and those priorities. I'm having a hard time. It sounds like I'm worried that we might have a situation where we have a culture that's going to eat our strategy because it doesn't necessarily fit. My guess is my interpretation of what we have is we're going to prioritize the roads for those access to those amenities like the schools and whatnot, and we're going to prioritize access for our key hubs to be able to access the highways so that we can mitigate that, and while we're still going to offer the opportunities for bicycles, we are definitely going to have access where there's priority for vehicles. Am I on the right page there as far as the?
Yeah, I mean, vehicles are, in North America, vehicles have been a priority for the last, since they were invented, probably. This is just bringing some focus on bringing more of the other modes of transportation forward, right? So cars we're not planning on getting rid of cars on any of our streets. They'll always be a part of what we do, but we need to make some easier ways for people to get around on other ways than cars, because we've been focusing on that a lot for the last while, if
Right.
that makes sense.
We're just adding to what we have, and we're going to make sure that we still incorporate what we need
Yeah,
for access.
Exactly. We're not removing cars from any of some communities are. I mean, some communities are looking at creating streets that don't allow cars at all, but we're not thinking about that for here at all. It's a different context than we are. Okay, road network and parking. There we go. So looking at encouraging the development of important road connections in the community. And there's a bit of a focus on Patterson to Smith. So that's the connection through a development property to connect through there. And then Curtin Avenue to Okanagan is also another development connection that we're looking at, identified in the special development areas. Developing our parking strategy and cash and lieu, a traffic safety plan for heavy trucks, speed zone change in the downtown, and encouraging back lanes in higher density residential areas so we don't have so many people turning onto busy roads. They can come onto the lanes and then feed onto the busier roads. Transit and regional connections, looking at securing tenure at our transit stops, at our current, I think, and future. I'm waiting for Brad's comments on these, but I suspect that will be one of the things. And then continue to work with our transit partners to increase transit opportunities. Then looking at growth aligned infrastructure, so talking about efficient, effective services. Make sure we don't leapfrog our development. So we want to be growing in a linear way rather than having, say, a neighborhood that suddenly we got to put servicing 2 kilometers along a road. Just do it in an incremental way. Looking at, these are all things we're already doing, our infrastructure master plans, our subdivision servicing bylaw, our development cost charges, updating of bylaws, maintaining our updated modeling, and continuing to explore partnerships around regional servicing solutions, including wastewater facilities. Water, so continue to update the water master plan. We need to look at watershed protection. So we have good water, restricting and limiting bulk water sales and water intensive land uses. So we don't want to encourage a lot of water intensive industry in town. Consider the opportunity to have water main looping when we can with new development or redevelopment, efficient use of water, and provide leadership in and education in water conservation, which we already do. Sewer. So this would be where maybe we should add the electroflocculation, or maybe it's more general. Continue to complete improvements to our sewer collection system to reduce infiltration, enhance our capacity, and continue to meet service needs. So we just kept it very general. Okay. Decommission and repurpose the existing lagoons. I just wanted to have that in writing somewhere, so. Stormwater, on-site stormwater management is encouraged, minimize impervious surfaces, and mitigate the impact of surface parking by having permeable surfaces where we can, and appropriate catch basins for contaminants. So well, we know if we're gonna have extreme storms, we got more water coming, we have more pavement, it's just gonna cause problems. In Vernon, we had a lot of downtown flooding with those flash storms that we had, so it's just about reducing that. Smart asset management. So looking at having a good management and maintenance of our assets, integrating our natural assets. So in a lot of ways, the creeks and the open ditches, and they're part of our system. And we need to make sure that they're considered, appreciated, valued, and taken care of. Cost of development, ensure that costs of development are not borne by the general taxpayer by prioritizing infrastructure upgrades that unlock infill and densification rather than sprawl. Because if we're putting more houses on our existing services, it's just more cost efficient. Continue to build our financial reserves, develop our DCC bylaw, and look at operation and maintenance costs and cost recovery when we make decisions about our infrastructure and our facilities.
Really basic question. The term smart, like there's lots of different definitions of the word smart. Some of it's technology based, some of it's like planning some specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Is there significance to that, or no?
We could just call it asset management.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think it's just about making good asset management decisions. Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy to change that if you want. And that's it for tonight. So the next section that the consulting team is going to come in is going to talk about development approval information, development permit areas, and that's pretty much the whole OCP broken down into 3 pieces. So 2 hours for your next one as well. The development permit areas are quite dense, but it just gives me more options when I'm bringing forward stuff to you to make sure we have the best proposals.
Quick thought, there's a lot of talk at the UBCM about additions to things like the DCCs or changes around that. I wonder if we had language in there to incorporate additions, or we would just do an amendment to the OCP if something like that came to light.
Yeah. Are you thinking like to expand our DCCs? Is that what you mean?
There was talk about like addition, like new development, something additional to, or something different than the DCC.
An amenity cost charge, maybe?
There was something along those lines, but there was also, they were talking about things that were new.
The amenity cost charge is new.
Okay.
Even though we've kind of called ours an amenity cost charge, our amenity cost charge is our version of a development cost charge. I haven't specifically talked about the amenity cost charge. I suspect we might see some wording in there. The amenity cost charge is for new recreational facilities driven specifically by growth in areas where you don't have any service. So it applies, in my mind, it applies more in areas where, say, Calgary, where you have a whole new neighborhood being created and there's no recreation amenities in that neighborhood. Where, because we're so small and dense and we're mostly going to be infill, I think it'll be harder for us to make the case that we need a new rec center over there, or But because we're developing brand new DCCs, we'll include we can include the new powers around fire halls and all of that stuff from the get-go.
Yeah, I don't think it was an amenity cost charge. It was something along the lines to help reduce the burden on the developers for bringing in things like sewer and upgrading.
Oh.
So there was some talk at roundtables about how that might be incorporated in different ways.
Okay.
So it's just a thought that popped into my head.
Okay. I'll need more information on that before I can. All right. Any last thoughts? That's all I got for you tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. That was really good. Lots of information, and I think you're on the right path moving forward. I think
Great.
we're shaping up well.
Excellent. So our next steps are to have that workshop. And then I feel like once I have a comfort level with council on the words that are in the OCP, I want to do some more targeted outreach to different partners. But then I think we also will need to look at having an open house before we do our official public hearing. Because I think it would be good to check back in with the community after our first open house. So we'll reach out about scheduling and trying to figure that out as we move forward. Okay.
What's our target date for rollout?
For
Approximately?
for adoption.
Well, and to start on the open house, once you get what you consider your final version, to look at open houses, have more public input.
I think November. I think
Really?
we'll be able to,
pretty quick.
because we have a workshop scheduled in, what is it? It's mid-October, I think, the next workshop. And then after that, we'll be able to roll up the draft and start meeting with people. And then we can have the open house at any time. And that'll give us a little bit more time to tweak it. And then if we do it in November, and then we can bring back a final version for actual bylaws and public hearing. We won't quite meet the December 30th target for adoption from the province, but I think we'll be able to demonstrate that we're well on our way.
Seeing nothing further for tonight, I will entertain a motion for adjournment. We have a Councillor Wayner, second by Councillor Todd. All those in favor? And that will be carried. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.